And so here we are, the 250th anniversary of the United States of America. This is a quick video I just wanted to throw together as well. By the time the 300th anniversary comes around, I'm going to be pushing 80, and it's really hard to tell if I'm even going to be around at that time or not. So, how am I going to spend this anniversary? Well, I feel like there's always been a lot of talk on the news. There's always somebody that says, I know my rights. Well, do you? I want to go over the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. But before doing so, I think it's pretty important to note what exactly is being celebrated on July 4th. That was the day that the Declaration of Independence was first signed. Now, there was only one person that actually signed that document. The biggest signature on it, John Hancock. Now, the main reason he was the only one is, well, such a thing was high treason. In fact, there was quite a high reward to turn in any of the signers of the Declaration, as such an act was considered high treason. So, you may be wondering why all the signatures. It's a lot like today, whenever somebody gets a petition going. The more signatures you have, the more validity such a document has. It's basically a way of saying, we're serious. Now, much like Bastille Day over in France, the day that's celebrated as Independence Day is a bit of a misnomer, perhaps, because a lot of people would think that July 4th, 1776, that must have been the day that the British Empire surrendered at Yorktown. However, that's not the case. But anyway, let's get into the rights. Now, the main thing to note is that this document was written well over 200 years ago, so the language can be a little hard to follow. So, I have a translation. This is just one of those things I like to keep around. I feel like this is just important knowledge, being an American citizen. What are your rights? So, the First Amendment of the Constitution, that's another bit of a misnomer, as it actually covers a lot. So the First Amendment, you got the freedom of religion, you got freedom of speech, you got freedom of the press, and you have freedom of assembly and petition. Now, I'm just kind of curious. I know there's been a lot of talk about that very First Amendment being kind of under scrutiny as of late, as if it's not being applied to the fullest. So how is it written in the Constitution itself? This is obviously a copy, an official Boy Scouts of America copy. Kind of ironic, really, but I was one at one point. Let's see, so the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Who would have thought? One sentence, 4 rights. 4 for 1. Now, one of the things to note is that even though it was saying that Congress shall make no law, there have been provisions over the years. So probably the most famous, it was a court case called Schenck v. U.S., which basically says you can't yell, "Fire!" inside of a crowded theater. I'm sure there's more stipulations, but I'm not part of the judicial branch. This is just kind of a quick rundown of the basic rights. And even before that, when John Adams was the president, you had the XYZ affair, where basically the French, after they helped us out a lot during our revolution, wanted our help during their revolution. However, John Adams didn't think it was a good idea to be sending them money, especially with Robespierre and the Reign of Terror going around. And there were a lot of people that were very critical of the president at the time. And so, there were these temporary laws put into place that basically said, hey, you can't make fun of the president because he just didn't want to hear it. Then on to probably the most contested of all the amendment rights, the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. This is one of those amendments where as I get older, it makes a little more and more sense. It's not so much to protect the people from each other, but to protect the people from the government. All too often in the news you hear about stories of oppressive governments, and we in the States just like, well, why don't they just rebel? Well, it's hard to be able to go against a government that is equipped with fully automatic machine guns when all you just have are sticks and rocks. It's not necessarily the best way to do it, but much like how the United States was in the 50s, it's more like a war of attrition. The idea that if both of you are on equal footing in terms of technology, then one won't be oppressing the other. And it's the idea that, like, if you are going to attack, then you know there's going to be a retaliation. Kind of similar to Teddy Roosevelt's famous phrase of, speak softly and carry a big stick. The idea of, like, it's not so much that you have to have your words be loud, it's you have to have actions in order to back up your words. This is one of the ones that I want to cash in on personally. Limits the quartering of soldiers. Just curious, how did they phrase this in the actual Constitution? No soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. A lot of people would say that this is a bit of a relic because during the Revolutionary War, well, leading up to it actually, the British government was forcing the colonists to be able to put their soldiers up in their house at their expense. And this is a way of basically saying, hey, remember the Quartering Act? We're not going to have that in our new country. And then these next few is what I like to call the Miranda rights section. So it may be possible that you've seen any sort of cop thriller or whatnot. There is always the idea that after the guy is arrested, the police officer will start off with, you have the right to remain silent. And that's kind of being said within these next few amendments, so let me just kind of go through it. It's, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be held against you in a court of law. You have a right to an attorney. If you can't afford one, the court will assign one to you. And so the Fourth Amendment is the idea of limiting search and seizure. So it's the idea that an officer would have to have a warrant or some sort of just cause in order to come into your house to collect evidence. In fact, how is this said in the actual Fourth Amendment? The right of the person to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. So, just to be sure, because when I was like 12 years old going through this, I'm like, seizures, what do you mean, like when you have an epileptic episode? It's more about the idea of seizing somebody's property, to take them. Shall not be violated, and no warrants shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue, but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. And then the fifth one. So it's always been said that, like, if you're losing a court case, you can plead the fifth. And this kind of goes into the right to remain silent. It's the idea that you have the right to due process. You have to have a fair trial. But mostly when people talk about the Fifth Amendment, it's protection against self-incrimination. So say somehow you were just up on the witness stand and you were just saying, ugh, I would kill for something like that. Wait, no, don't take that out of context. That's kind of what that's for. The right to due process of law, including protection against self-incrimination. Now let's see, what does it say here? No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces, or in the militia, when in actual service in wartime or public danger. I think that's where court-martials come in. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in the jeopardy. They call that double jeopardy. So it's the idea that if you are proven innocent for a crime, you can't be charged with it again. Put in jeopardy of life or limb. I guess that's kind of a time capsule. They would just take a limb off. I guess in some Middle Eastern cultures, the penalty for stealing is that you lose the hand that you stole it with. Nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property. Okay, now that's interesting. So, historical scholars, or at least American scholars, would definitely know that that comes from John Locke. That was always his big thing. It's the idea that as a person we all have the rights to life, liberty, and property. However, I believe in the Declaration of Independence, that is where we changed it up a little bit. So instead it was life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So it's up to you. Do you prefer property or the pursuit of happiness? Without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. And then let's see, the sixth one I remember being kind of confusing. Rights of a person accused of a crime, including the right to be represented by a lawyer. You have the right to an attorney. Okay, and then the seventh, you have the right to a jury in civil cases. I'm going to guess it's more like grand jury stuff. How is it presented in the seventh? In suits at common law, where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, which, $20 back in, let's see, when were these ratified? 1791. That was a lot of money, I'm sure. The right of trial by jury shall be preserved, and no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court of the United States than according to the rules of common law. Okay. Then the eighth one, unfair bails, fines, and punishment forbidden. So the idea of, that's where we get the term of cruel and unusual punishment from. And then the ninth one. This, to me, sounds like it would be insanely exploitable. So here's how it's written in the Constitution itself, the Ninth Amendment. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. So, is it my Ninth Amendment right to be able to transition? Is it my Ninth Amendment right to wear makeup? What is my Ninth Amendment right? In fact, even here on my little study sheet it says, citizens entitled to rights not listed in the Constitution. Now, from what I hear, that one was put in there as, in order for this document to be ratified, so many states had to agree to it. And that was one of the provisions. It's like, well, wait a minute, what about the other rights of the people that are not listed in here? Alright, fine, you get the other rights in there. And what are those other rights? Good question. And then the 10th one, it's pretty similar, except it's for the state itself. Powers reserved to states or the people? Okay, how does it say it in the 10th? The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. Like I say, these two amendments just sound so exploitable. So, that is the Bill of Rights. After enough of the colonies agreed to it, those were the first 10 rights that everybody as a United States citizen got. Now I'm just going to rattle through the rest of them. This is a little appendix here. Since 1791, only 16 amendments have been added to the Constitution. Some of these amendments have extended our rights as citizens. Okay, so the 11th Amendment, which was added in 1795. Rules for lawsuits against the state. Very interesting. The 12th, which was added in 1804. New way of electing the president and vice president. So is that when the Electoral College was added? I get the feeling the Electoral College was around before that. It was just the popular vote. All they just had to do was go to New York City, I would wager. So that was the 12th. Okay. The electors shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for president and vice president, one of whom at least shall not be an inhabitant of the same state with themselves. They shall name in their ballots the person voted for as president in the district. Oh boy, that is a big amendment. It's a little too intimidating, so if anybody knows what the 12th Amendment's all about, feel free to leave a comment down below. 13th Amendment. Kind of sad it took this long to get that far, but 1865. That is when slavery was abolished. However, I can't help thinking that's kind of an oversimplification. Some people basically say that, like, slavery can be a thing. You know what, let me see what it says. So there's actually 2 sections of the 13th Amendment, which is interesting. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So even the colonies can't have slaves. But that's a bit interesting. The idea that if somebody loses a major court case or commits a horrible enough crime, they can be legally enslaved. Maybe Section 2 has something to do with it. Section 2. Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. I get the feeling that part was added in there during Juneteenth. So for those of you that may be wondering where Juneteenth came from, I forget the year exactly, but I want to say it was during the Rutherford B. Hayes administration, where basically there were a lot of former slave owners in the South that did not tell their slaves that they were free. Well, the president was just like, yeah, that's not going to work. So he sent a whole bunch of soldiers to all these slave owners, and it's just like, no, they're free. Let them go. And so that stranglehold was gone. And again, I'm not really sure if I'm the most appropriate person to talk to about this. 14th. Guarantees citizenship, due process, and equal protection under the law, 1868. I get the feeling that one's probably being attacked as of late. The 15th Amendment. Voting rights for former slaves, 1870. Took him 5 years. Isn't that nice? 16th. Well, actually, even if you want to go further back than that, I mean, like, some people use the phrase grandfathered in. Well, even though it was a constitutional right, there were so many other barriers that had to be hopped through in order to actually get the right to vote if you were a former enslaved person. And one of the laws on the books was the idea that, like, if your grandfather was allowed to vote, then you're able to vote. However, just going from the timeline, it would basically mean that you had to have a relative before slavery was abolished to be able to vote. And even then, if somehow you did have a relative that was that way, odds are, if the guy just didn't like you, they'd probably just kick you out of the voting area. Once again, not sure if I'm the most appropriate person to talk to about this, but if you want more history on that, I'm sure there's a lot of other people that know more than I do about it. 16th Amendment. Power of the federal government to collect income tax. 1913. I get the feeling that must have been under the Teddy Roosevelt administration, because you're telling me that there was no income tax until 113 years ago? How well did the government get their money? 17th Amendment. Election of senators by the people, 1913. Kind of wonder if there's more an explanation here. 17th? Yeah, 17th. The Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state, elected by the people thereof for 6 years, and each senator shall have 1 vote. The electors in each state shall have the qualifications, requisites for electors of the most numerous branch of state legislature. When vacancies happen in the representation of any state in the Senate, the executive authority of such state shall issue writs of election to fill. And vacancies provided that the legislature of any state may empower the executive, therefore, to make temporary appointments until the people fill the vacancies by election as the legislature may direct. This amendment shall not be construed as to affect the election or term of any Senate chosen before it becomes valid as part of the Constitution. Can you make heads or tails of that? Because I can't. 18th is a fun one. Bans the sale of alcohol, 1919. One of the ones that I'm very happy about, the 19th Amendment, 1920, gives women the right to vote. The 20th, set the date when President's and Congress terms begin, 1933. So how was it set up before? It was just kind of like, yeah, let's elect it now. Well, why now? I don't know, things are kind of slow in the summer. And then the 21st, which repeals the 18th. So from 1919 to 1933, there was no legal way to drink alcohol in the United States. And that is just such a fascinating time in history, especially when you get people in signs saying, "We want our beer." Considering that alcohol was very much a founding part of this country. In fact, I think it was James Monroe that wanted to have a Secretary of Beer. Because we weren't really sure about the drinking water, and, well, we knew that booze was definitely a safe alternative to drink. It was potable. Just can't drink too much of it, obviously. 22nd Amendment limits the president to 2 terms. 1951. Well, that's not before FDR basically took advantage of that by having 4 terms. 23rd Amendment gives people in the District of Columbia the right to vote for the president. So the people living in Washington, D.C. couldn't vote for the president? That's interesting. 24th forbids having to pay a tax to vote. Wow. It would make sense that that would come out in 1964, a way to try to actually enforce the 15th Amendment a little more, because it's like, oh, you may have been former slaves, but, well, you gotta pay. Oh, you don't have money? Well, you can't vote. All these little different things here and there. I know that for the last 2 presidential terms, the 25th one has come up a lot, says who's the next in line if something is to happen to the president, if the president is seen as unfit to rule. Which, I forget the chain of command, but from what I remember, if the president is struck down during office, which it has happened a few times, then the vice president takes over. And as of yet, I don't think the vice president has ever been taken down after the president, but if such a thing were to happen, then it would be the Speaker of the House. And then from there, I think he would just kind of slowly go on down line to the Senate, but, well, let's be honest, after you get past, like, the 4th person in a row to run for president, I'd wager that there's something even worse going on. And then the 26th, set the age of 18 for voting in 1971. Kind of makes you wonder what the age was before, or if you just walked up and they're just like, yeah, you're good. Trying to think if there's... Yeah, that's as much as it goes up to. So, those are the rights. Know your rights. It is a very important thing if you're a citizen of the United States. Well, I know I won't be around for it, but here's hoping for another 250. Until next time, stars and stripes forever.